In the rigid, glittering world of European royalty, love was never meant to be free. It was negotiated, arranged, and sacrificed for alliances, treaties, and power. But every so often, a story emerges that defies those rules. A story not of crowns, but of hearts. And few are as haunting as the tale of Sophia Dorothea of Celle, a princess who dared to fall in love with the wrong man, and paid a price that would echo through history. She was born into nobility in 1666, the only child of George William, Duke of Brunswick-Lüneburg. Unlike many royal daughters, Sophia Dorothea was not raised for obscurity. She was valuable, politically significant, and destined for a marriage that would shape the future of Europe. That marriage came early. At just 16, she was wed to her cousin George Louis of Hanover, a man who would one day ascend to the British throne. But from the very beginning, the marriage was not built on affection. It was a union of strategy, not love. George Louis was cold, distant, and openly unfaithful. Sophia Dorothea, young and isolated, found herself trapped in a court where appearances mattered more than happiness. She fulfilled her duty, producing 2 children, including the future George II of Great Britain, but emotionally she lived a life of quiet despair. And then everything changed. Into her world stepped Philipp Christoph von Königsmarck. He was everything her husband was not: charismatic, attentive, and dangerously charming. A Swedish count and soldier, Königsmarck moved through European courts with ease, but his presence in Hanover would ignite one of the most scandalous royal affairs of the 17th century. What began as companionship quickly deepened into something far more serious. Letters were exchanged, passionate, desperate, filled with longing. For Sophia Dorothea, he was not just a lover, he was an escape. But in royal courts, secrets rarely stay hidden. Their relationship unfolded against a tense political backdrop. Europe was a web of alliances and rivalries, and Königsmarck, as a Swedish nobleman, was not simply an outsider. He represented interests that did not always align with Hanover's. To fall in love with him was not just a personal risk, it was a political threat. And yet, they continued. Whispers began to spread through the palace corridors. Servants noticed, courtiers speculated, and eventually suspicion reached her husband. For George Louis, this was not merely betrayal, it was humiliation. A royal wife's infidelity could damage reputations, destabilize alliances, and challenge authority. The stakes were far too high to ignore. Then, in 1694, the story took a dark and irreversible turn. Königsmarck vanished. He was last seen entering the Leine-Schloss Palace in Hanover, the very residence of Sophia Dorothea and her husband. He never came out. No body was ever officially found. No trial was held. But history has long suspected the truth, that he was murdered, likely on the orders of those who sought to protect the honor and stability of the Hanoverian court. Sophia Dorothea would never see him again. But her punishment was only beginning. Shortly after his disappearance, she was formally accused of adultery. Her marriage was dissolved, not as a quiet separation, but as a public disgrace. Stripped of her title, cut off from her children, and erased from court life, she was imprisoned in Alden House, a remote castle where she would spend the rest of her life. She was just 28 years old. For over 3 decades, Sophia Dorothea lived in isolation. No visits from her children, no return to court, no second chance at freedom. The world moved on. Her former husband became King George I of Great Britain, founding a new royal dynasty. Her son would rule after him. Her name, however, was deliberately forgotten. buried beneath the official narrative of royal respectability. And yet, her story refused to disappear completely. Because behind the politics, behind the silence, there remained something undeniably human. A woman who had dared to choose love in a world that demanded obedience. What makes her story so compelling is not just the tragedy, but the questions it leaves behind. Was Sophie Dorothea reckless or simply human in a system that denied her any real choice? Was Königsmarck's disappearance an act of justice in the eyes of power, or a brutal silencing of a forbidden truth? And perhaps most haunting of all, what would have happened if she had never fallen in love at all? In the end, Sophie Dorothea was not remembered as a queen, though she might have been. She was remembered as a scandal, a cautionary tale, a woman who crossed an invisible line and paid for it with her freedom, her family, and her future. A princess who fell in love with the enemy. And a love story that ended not with a reunion, but with a disappearance. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing a royal can do is follow their heart. And now, as her story fades into the quiet corners of history, one question remains. Was Sophie Dorothea a victim of a ruthless political world? Or did her choices seal her fate? Type your thoughts below.